One of the most common ear training questions I get is whether we should be trying to hear the notes relative to the overall key of the music or relative to the chord of the moment. For example, if you imagine a song that's in this key, and this is the one chord, and then at some point you can hear that it goes up to some other chord and you can hear the melody up here. Now that note, should I be trying to recognize that note's position within the overall key? So for example, maybe I could recognize that this was my 1, and then 2, and then 3, and that makes this note up here a 4. Or should I be noticing the relationship of this note to the chord of the moment? So I can hear that this is a minor chord, and I can hear that that note on top, that's the flatted third of the chord, da 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 da. So which should I be listening for? Should I be trying to recognize these notes by their relationship to the chord, or based on where they are in the overall key of the music? And so the best and most complete answer that I can give you is that every note has both aspects to it. Every note has its relationship to the overall key of the music, which is where it comes from, and every note also has its relationship to the chord of the moment. And so we're not trying to prioritize one aspect over the other. We're not trying to just hear one aspect, because all of the richness of harmony comes from having these two different relationships going on at the same time. And so as we study music, this is exactly what we're trying to understand. We're trying to assimilate all this and tie it all together so that it all becomes part of a single reality in our mind. I want to show you a demonstration that I think will help you to be at peace with this duality and to realize it's not something you need to solve. And what I want to show you are just two opposite extremes that will emphasize more one aspect or the other. So we're going to look at two different kinds of songs here. One song we could imagine spends a long time in the one chord. So you're going to feel a very strong attraction to note 1 as the tonal center. And then we're just going to go up very briefly to the 2 chord and immediately go right back to the 1 chord. So imagine something like this. We're here on the 1 chord, and we might be here all day, right? And let's imagine a melody. So my melody might be like 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then it goes up to 4, 3, 2. And immediately 1, 2, 3. So when you hear it that way, I'm sure you're hearing the notes the whole time the way they sound in what we call the first harmonic environment, meaning it just sounds like the major scale to you. I play 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 3, 2, and 1, 2, 3. Nothing changes there. So even though I went up to the 2 chord for some of those notes, and you could hear how the background changed also, you were still feeling the notes the way they sound in the first harmonic environment, because the whole time you were feeling note 1 as the tonal center. And so even that 2 chord in the background just felt like a momentary departure, like a little bit of suspension in the background, but it's eventually going to get resolved. Okay, so now let's think about the opposite extreme. And to drive the point home, what I want you to realize is it's going to be the exact same song. It's the exact same song, but we're just going to slow it down and stretch it out so it takes all day. And so let's imagine we've been playing in this 1 chord for the last 4 hours. And when I go up to this 4, 3, 2, and the 2 chord, right? Now even this moment lasts like an hour. After a couple minutes in this 2 chord, you've forgotten all about the 1 chord. You no longer feel that attraction to note 1 as the tonal center. You no longer feel that we've got to go back home. You're at home now in this new chord. So much so that you might even want to change your vocabulary and just call these notes 1. This is a new note 1, and then 2, and flat 3. You might imagine some sort of minor scale that you can impose over that. I'm going to recommend you don't do that, and I'll explain why later. But the point is that it would be reasonable to do that, because now you're really just feeling this new note, this 2 down here, as the tonal center. And so now the notes, the aspect that's more obvious to you, or that you're feeling more clearly, is their relationship to the chord of the moment. You're hearing this note 4 up here as the minor third of this chord, it's the minor third of 2, and that's how you're feeling that note. And so the answer is that it's really both. Every note we play or every note we hear in a song really has both aspects to it. It has its relationship to the overall tonal center that we're feeling, and it also has its relationship to the chord of the moment, and this duality is part of the richness and the beauty of Western harmony. The only piece of advice that I would add to that is that I recommend you don't change your vocabulary and call this new note flat 3. It's very good to know that it's the minor third of this new chord, the 2 chord, to understand that relationship between 4 and 2. That's something we know about note 4, but we don't change its name. Its name continues being note 4. It doesn't matter whether it's 4 suspended up out of place in this 1 chord and it wants to come back down to 3, or whether it's this 4 that's perfectly at home in the 2 chord. In both cases, we're going to keep naming that note 4, because if you want to understand chord progressions, you want to understand songs, you want to be able to improvise freely and express the melodies you imagine, it's really important that you've got a map of all these sounds that doesn't change. We can't have a new note 1 for every measure and try to build some new scale in a new place and try to figure out where the sounds are. Just because the chord changes doesn't mean the key is changing. And so when all of these sounds really do come from a single key, it's really helpful to just see that, to see the big picture, and to see every single note as it relates to the original key of the music. And so that note is still going to be our 4, whether it's in the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 5 chord, some other chord. And the nice thing is I can see so clearly how this 4 connects down to my 3 in the 1 chord. That's why we do this, is so we can see the entire flow of the harmony at once on a single visual map of our musical system. And so I encourage you to think of the tonal number, meaning that note 4, the position of this note in the overall key of the music. I want you to think of that as the name of the note. Okay, that's the name of the note, and that's where it lives, and that's what we have to see clearly. Then any relationship that that note has to any other chord we might be interested in, that's something we know about that note. So we know that note 4 is the minor third or the flatted third of the 2 chord, but we don't change its name and call it flat 3. We keep calling it note 4. And that's how it's through studying that you can then listen to that song on the radio, and you can hear that all of these are just kind of different pieces of a single thing that's happening. The song goes up to the 2 chord, the melody goes up to note 4, everything checks out, everything confirms everything else, and that's how we learn to recognize these things by ear.